we had a day, and we threw our stuff in the back of my car, my Jeep Wrangler. I look over at Travis, he looks over at me, and he says, "Well, there you have it." And I said,
Yeah,
"Yes,
there it
indeed."
was. Check it
Not sure there
out.
was much more to say, but
Oh,
that was our
wow.
journey.
Welcome to the Greens and Blues 14er podcast. On this episode, I, Zach, run into a bison. Eric goes on the hero's journey that ends in his miraculous transformation. And we talk about Eric's first 14er experience on Long's Peak.
All right, Zach, we are going to walk through my first 14er ever, which was Long's Peak, and that'll be quite an endeavor. But before we get into that, I'm curious how you're doing, man.
I'm doing well. It is winter in Oklahoma, which means a couple things. It means the air is drier, and it
Mm,
means I can go hiking.
there you
Uh,
go.
so a lot of people probably listening to this would never think that you could hike in Oklahoma. There's not a lot of it. I'm gonna be honest. There's a few places that I like to go that are pretty good. And I went on a hike this week down to the Wichita National Wildlife Refuge.
I think you've talked about that before.
Yeah, is actually really nice. I always see a lot of wildlife there.
Mm,
This trip, I saw 7 deer, 3 elk, and a very large male bison,
wow.
free range, because it's all free range there,
Yeah.
within about 20 feet of the trail. And I walked up behind it. And I kind of came around a corner and I turned to my right and I was like, oh, there's a male bison.
There's a big old bison there.
And there's that moment that goes through your head of like, okay, I can't outrun this thing.
Oh no.
And I
No,
was
yeah.
looking around and I was like, if it gets feisty, what do I hide
What's your
behind?
escape route? Yeah.
Yeah. And no, it was just kind of standing there and it just kind of looked at me. And I was very grateful for that.
Oh yeah.
So, but a beautiful, beautiful day. I like to hike here in the winter because, well, the summer's unbearable and there's no ticks. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was a lovely hike, and I got in about 8.5 miles.
No, it's a good hike.
Yeah, not bad.
No.
So for those that live in Colorado, I don't know if it's worth making a special trip to Oklahoma for, but if you ever find yourself in Oklahoma, there is actually a few places to hike around here. So
That sounds cool. And good on you for not pulling a Yellowstone tourist move and trying to get really close to that bison and take like a selfie with it or
get
something
out
silly.
my selfie stick,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
my golf club with my phone taped to it.
And then he charges you for it.
Yeah, no,
He goes after you.
I had a summer internship in Kansas when I was in college, and it was on Konza Prairie research station, and there were a bunch of free range bison there, and we had like a whole day where they just talked to us about how to behave around bison,
Oh
and
yeah.
getting close to them is rule number one. Don't.
That's a bad idea.
That is
That's a
a
bad
bad
idea.
idea.
Yeah.
They're also eerily quiet.
Mm.
For an animal that weighs 1,000 pounds, you don't hear them walk. Like I've had one sneak up behind me before.
Oh yeah.
And like I turn around, they're like 2 feet from me, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah. We were in
um,
Yellowstone many years ago and we were having a picnic at like a side spot and there was a trail down below and there were two bison that walked up very slowly and very quietly like you described up the trail to the point where we actually had to run to our car. We left the food there, got into our car, closed the door, started driving away, and these bison every once in a while they would turn their heads and look at us to see what we were doing, but otherwise they were very calm, they were very quiet like you said, but we were just like we're going to take an abundance of caution here because if these things get mad, we are not going to be in a good spot.
yeah,
So,
they can, if it's a male, they can gore you.
hmm.
I think their primary method of self-defense is to just stomp on you a lot. So
And that would hurt.
It
That might not feel good.
might not feel good.
Yeah.
I would find in the prairie, I'd find like copperhead snakes that had just been flattened,
Oh, wow.
like a steamroller ran over them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that's what I'm up to. Eric, it is winter time in the sunny state of Colorado. What have you guys been up to?
We've been up to, or at least three of the four of us in my family have been up to basically lying in bed and resting and trying to get over a pretty nasty cold that I think our boys are now over. And unfortunately, my wife Rachel's not doing so well right now. She's pretty tired and trying to recover through that. So it is winter cold season here in the
Is it
Centennial
the
State.
Rona or is it what is it?
She couldn't taste dinner last night, so she took a COVID test and thankfully it came back negative, but it's just she's just stuffed up beyond belief and just can't taste anything. So it's not the Rona, but it's a pretty nasty cold going around our family, so I'm
What are
hoping
you
to avoid
doing
it.
to duck this, Eric?
I don't know what it is. I'm eating same things that they are and taking my vitamin C, so whatever it is, I'm talking with you, so maybe that's what's helping. I'm getting ready for our talk today.
Yeah, well, with that in mind,
How's that for a transition? I didn't even try
woo,
that.
didn't didn't even have to force that. Um, Today we're going to talk about your first 14er experience on Long's Peak.
Mm.
Why is it important, Eric, to chat about your first 14er experience today? What, oh great sage, can we learn from your tale?
I'm not sure what to learn, but other than this is quite an odyssey that we may be walking through here. I would say choosing your first 14er for anyone that hasn't hiked a 14er and is interested in doing so, choosing your first one is actually, I would say, pretty important because having a class 3 excursion like Long's for a guy who grew up as a flatlander, that was not a good idea. And I'll get into more as to why we chose that one. But yeah, it's important to be prepared for your first 14er, to kind of know what you're getting into, and to choose one that is one that you feel comfortable is going to be within your skill set because Longs was absolutely not in my skill set, not even in the same universe. So it's important to kind of be a bit ready for what you're going to get into.
I think that's great. And I think as we go along, we'll probably pick up some more kind of nuggets of wisdom here. I think probably like people listening to this, I'm on the 14ers Facebook page. I'm on the Colorado 13ers Facebook page.
Yep.
Look at the 14ers.com page quite a bit. And I see the preponderance of posts on those pages are, at least the 14ers page on Facebook and on the .com, are like asking questions a lot of the time about what to do for a first 14er,
Mm-hmm.
asking for guidance, and then a lot of time people just posting their summit photos of their first 14er
Yeah,
and kind of posting their wins. And I think it's obviously more and more people are hiking right now, and more people are pursuing 14ers as a thing over the last decade, especially. And so I think it's important to just kind of reflect on what it means to do a first 14er and what that entails. In your case, probably some of the missteps along the way
for
that
sure.
led you to doing a 15-mile round trip class 3 14er for your first one. So so
Uh,
maybe that's a good place to begin, Eric. Why the heck did you pick Long's Peak?
a tiny bit of context there. So yeah, I grew up in Michigan, lived in Ohio for a couple of years, Illinois for about 10 years. So the first 34, 35 years of my life, I was a pure flatlander. So in early 2010, I moved out to Colorado. A couple months later, my wife joined me. She had to wrap up a couple things back in Illinois. So in July, we moved into our home in Parker at the time, which is a suburb of Denver. And soon after we moved in, my buddy Travis calls and said, "Hey, can I come out and visit for a few days?" And we said, "Sure, of course." So he comes out to visit and he asks me, "Hey, Eric, do you want to hike a 14er with me?" And I've
As one does.
I've got the spirit of Colorado adventure in me now, and I'm like, "Sure, let's go." By the way, what is a 14er? I've never heard this term. Can you help me understand what a 14er is? And so he dragged me to REI and we got a camelback and trekking poles and hiking boots and all this stuff. So we got back and so I'm ready. I'm ready to do a 14er. So we're like, which one are we going to do? And so I think that 14ers.com may have existed at that time in 2010. I don't recall.
It would have, and it would have been segregated into two different websites, 13ers.com and
Hmm.
14ers.com.
Yep, at one point it was. So we would have looked up the trip report for Longs there, and I know Travis brought his Jerry Roach 14ers book with him too. So we figured out, okay, what are we going to do? He had summited 19 14ers at that point.
Okay.
So
So
basically said
he knew better.
he knew his stuff for sure. And so he said, well, the closest 14er that I haven't done is in Rocky Mountain National Park. It's called Longs Peak, and I don't know any better. 12 hours earlier, I learned what a 14er was. So I didn't question anything. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So we did some research in Roach's book and on the .com. And so he said, okay, we're just going to set off. So that's how we ended up deciding to do Longs Peak is it happened to be one that was nearby and that Travis hadn't done yet. So
Okay, I've got a question for you here. You're anyone that knows you knows that you've been a runner most of your life,
yes.
cross country and track, right, Eric?
Correct. Yep.
In high school,
Hmm.
have run ever since. So when you see that number of whatever it is, I think it's 15 miles round trip,
Yeah.
are you daunted by that, or are you kind of like, I've done half marathons? Do you have any conception of like how hard that might feel or look at that
I,
point?
I may have had something because, to your point, I'd run a couple half marathons. I ran the Chicago Marathon, the full marathon in 2001. So that was several years prior to when we moved to Colorado in 2010. But so I had an idea of what that distance was, the elevation gain, the class difficulty, that really didn't compute with me. The round
Yeah.
trip, I may have looked at and said, okay, well, there's some up and down on a mountain, but I've done 26 miles and I ran it, so I'm not going to run this mountain. So there was probably some level of understanding of what lay ahead, but nowhere near what I should have prepared myself for.
Yeah. Okay, so you're going into this thing blind. Um,
Yes.
but flying blind here. How does your day start? What does that look like for you when you launch out on this great expedition?
Yeah. So we get up at like I don't remember what it was, like 2 in the morning, give or take. And we basically broke every rule that you have, Zach, when it comes to hiking in a mountain. We started way early. And honestly, it's good that we did. We should have
Yeah, in
done
this
that.
case, it may have been a good thing.
Yeah, I think it was. So we drive up to Rocky Mountain. We get to the trailhead. By the way, trailhead, like a lot of places in Rocky Mountain National Park, probably most places, it's passenger car accessible. It's really easy to get to. You can take anything to get there. So the trailhead was the Longs Peak trailhead. This is for the Keyhole Route, which is the standard route.
Hmm.
And like you mentioned, Zach, it's about 15-ish miles round trip. It's class three. Your gain is almost a mile. So again, going into this, that may not have meant a whole lot to me, but it really should have.
It's about to.
It's about, yeah, I'm about to figure out what a mile gain is. So yeah, you're starting low, and if you make it all the way, you're ending high. So we get to the trailhead, probably 3:34-ish, and it's pitch black, obviously.
Hmm.
We've got our headlamps.
What are
So,
you thinking at this moment, dude? Like, you've never really hiked in Colorado and you're hiking
oh
in the
no.
dark at this point. Are you just
Hmm.
like, I didn't know you were this down for whatever. I mean, if had I known this, I would have tried to sold you some Bitcoin or something in the
Oh,
last.
if Bitcoin came out in 2008 before I did Longspeed, I might have bought it from you, but I think this experience may have ruined me a little bit, but and I'm going to share a lot of stories. I have to take a bit of a moment for my buddy Travis. So my buddy Travis, massive adventure guy. At this point, he's summited over 30 14ers, I believe. I'm going to say some things that may not sound very encouraging during this episode, I love Travis. He's a great friend. He's been a great friend for a long time. I would not be the 14er fan or the 13er fan that I am today without Travis. He and I have summited a bunch of 14ers, as you and I have, Zach. I have you and he to thank for the passion that I have for the Colorado Mountains. And it started with him. I
Hmm.
would not have enjoyed the hikes that I've been able to be a part of if it weren't for him starting me out. Started out a bit aggressively with this one, but started
We're
out nonetheless.
deep into the pool here.
Yes,
So,
yeah, for sure.
so we're hiking in the dark. Walk me through this. I've actually not hiked Long's Peak, so
Mm,
kind of walk me through your day here.
yeah. So, and I think most people that are familiar with the Keyhole Route would divide it up into probably six sections. There's at least four or five distinct for sure. I would add a sixth one, which would be this first one, which is the initial approach. So, again, you're starting way below tree line, so you're hiking up through forest. There's, I think, a couple of spots where you do need to be a bit careful in terms of which way you go because you do come to a fork, and I'm sure it's well signed. I don't remember if it is or not, but you just have to be careful to go the right way on the trail. Otherwise, you end up in like Chasm Lake or Saskatchewan or somewhere. So you just keep an eye out for the signs, make sure you're going the right way and pay attention. But otherwise, the approach is it's class one, but it's a bit of a slog. If one way is 7.5 miles ish, probably a good 5.5 plus of it is this initial approach.
Okay. So you're
And
spending the bulk of your time just kind of chunking up trail, gaining altitude.
exactly, yeah, you're gaining a bunch of altitude, and you will come up above tree line, and you can see to your left, you see something poking up. You're kind of going up the hill, and over the hill, you see this rock mountain. I don't recall if that was actually Long's or if it was another peak, like maybe Mount Lady Washington or something like that.
Hmm.
But it was way up there, and that was my first inkling that we've got some more work to do. Like we've
What have
already,
I got myself into here?
yeah, that's kind of the first clue. But so eventually you top out above tree line and you get to the second section, which is called the boulder field. The boulder field, for anyone that's seen pictures, it is massive. It is this gigantic field, and it really just has a bunch of rocks on it, and you're just rock hopping up the boulder field.
Okay.
I remember hikers right as we were going up, there's a 13er storm peak that you can see, and to your left, you can actually see the diamond of Long's Peak, I believe. So it's the diamond is this east face and it's
Hmm.
sheer. People rock climb, like it's really impressive looking as you're walking up the boulder field. So it's really cool. But the same question comes to mind, like how in the world are we getting up there? Like that's quite a ways to go, and obviously we're not going up the diamond. So what are we going to do here? So the boulder field is actually kind of cool because if you get a permit, you can actually camp at the boulder field. For years, people have been able to do that. To me, it's kind of like six of one, half dozen of the other. I mean, you're either taking a lighter pack up 15 miles of round trip, or you're taking a heavy pack up, 5 miles just to make camp and then take your lighter pack up the rest of the way and then come back. So either way, there's a lot of effort and a lot
Yeah.
of sweat. So but people do it, and you have to get a permit to do it. But that's certainly an option if you want to kind of break it up into a 2 day situation. Most of this whole way in the boulder field, you're not really gaining much elevation, maybe a little bit.
Okay.
But at the end, you start to kind of go upwards a bit, and you eventually get to the keyhole itself that the route's named after. But Travis and I noticed something before we got to the keyhole, and that was that this is maybe 8, 9 in the morning ish. The sun is up. You can see pretty well at
Hmm.
this point. People are actually coming back from the keyhole this early in the morning, and this was a little peculiar to both of us. We were like, who are these superhumans
Are
that
they
like,
are they night clubbers
yeah,
hanging out on Long's Peak?
I'm looking for their glow sticks, and I'm like, where are these people coming from? But I thought they just, got up really early and were really in shape, and some did, and then came back. No, these people were saying things like, "Oh no, that's too scary. Oh no, I'm not doing that. Oh, that's way too sketchy. I'm not gonna go do that." And
Oh, so
so
they got turned around.
they turned around, and again, I'm 4 months removed from being a flatlander. I'm like, what is this term sketchy. I took it from the context clues that it wasn't good, but I just didn't
Yeah.
continuing to ask questions. What are we doing here? So I soon found out what we were doing and what we were supposed to do because eventually you get to the keyhole and you begin the third section, which is called the ledges. Now, I think I need to park here for a minute because once we went through the keyhole, my life changed in that moment because,
This this sounds like a hero's journey,
oh my gosh.
like going to the underworld or the abyss experience, or
Oh,
like this transformative experience.
oh my goodness. I texted Travis earlier this week because I mentioned to him that we were going to be talking about Long's Peak. And I said, hey, what are your memories of Long's Peak? And the first thing he says is, wow, going through the keyhole, it felt like going into Mordor.
Mm.
That's how transformative and how surreal that experience was. My guess is that folks that have some experience with longs or have really any experience with the Colorado Mountains at all probably don't see it that strongly and probably wouldn't be as transformed as I was.
But through the eyes of babes here, right? Like
For
you don't
sure.
even know what to expect. You're like, holy smokes, what have I gotten myself? What am I seeing?
Oh my gosh. All I remember, and in getting ready to talk about Long Speak, I had to go back and look at a bunch of other people's pictures and trip report and videos. I just remember the exposure on
Mm,
the ledges was it was like nothing I'd ever experienced in my life. And I honestly had been telling people lies up until this point. I had told everyone I don't like heights. That's what I would always say. That was my line. I don't like heights. I'm afraid of heights. I learned in that moment it's not actually heights that I'm afraid of. It's exposure that I'm afraid of.
yeah.
And that really got set into motion on the ledges because, again, other people might not feel that the exposure is that strong. But for me in that moment, that was all I could think of. And my knees started knocking. I was ready to turn right back at that moment. And
So
Travis is like,
why didn't you?
because my buddy has the courage of a lion and he says, no, we can do this. We're going to do this. And I'm just thinking in my head, I'm inventing words. Some of these words are coming out of my mouth. Like I just am being changed moment by moment, and I'm kind of a little bit beside myself, not sure what we're gonna do here.
This, it really does strike me that what you're describing is a kind of liminal experience, is what some people might call it. It's this
Mm.
kind of encounter with the limits of your own mortality and
Oh
humanity.
yeah.
I don't want to turn this into like a psychology podcast, but it is this kind of confrontation with something bigger than you that you had not yet exposed yourself to. And a lot of the time, what we need when we encounter those moments is a guide,
Mm-hmm.
someone to ferry us to the other side of that. And it seems like Travis was the Virgil to your Dante, or the the Enkidu to your Gilgamesh here, that helped you kind of go to the other side of this.
For sure.
That's really fascinating. So you're kind of up against it, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
in this moment, again, I'm a noob here. What are the ledges like? Like how long does this exposure last?
So I think it's probably not super long. Don't have a distance in mind. There are sections that we'll talk about in a minute that are certainly longer or take longer. The ledges, it's exposed the whole way, but you don't really gain much elevation. It's pretty lateral for the most part, and I don't think it lasts very long. But in the moment, it felt like it was taking forever.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
because I was, just again, really trying to get acclimated to what was going on around me, trying to make sure I don't stumble anywhere, anything like that. One nice thing that has happened over the years is people have painted these bullseyes in lieu of cairns, basically. So
Mm-hmm.
they'll painted red and yellow bullseyes on different rocks along the way to kind of show what the best path is. So it makes it pretty easy to follow the path of least resistance. But at the same time, I'm still just thinking, wow, this is kind of crazy. And for whatever reason, maybe it was just because we started really early. There are plenty of people on the hike. I mean, we went on a weekend in July, but for whatever reason, it wasn't until the ledges that we started meeting people that somehow just wanted to start talking to us. We
That's how
met
you
all
deal
these,
with nervousness.
I guess, the chatty Cathys came out, and so I remember there's two particular people I remember. One of them was I think a couple of guys that were just talking to us, and one of them looked at Travis and said, "Hey, how many 14ers have you done?" And Travis said, if we get to the top, this will be my 20th. And they're like, "Oh, that's really cool." And they look at me and they're like, "What about you, Scooter? How many have you done?" And I said, "Oh, this is my first one." And the room changed. Like these people, like their eyes turned into lasers, and they looked right over at Travis, and they're like, "What kind of friend are you taking your buddy up longs for his first 14?" And I was just
Uh,
like, I'm not really even reacting. I'm just staying quiet, absorbing all this. So there was another guy that passed us. I'm sure we were getting passed left and right. Again, I'm going as slow as I possibly can and overly cautious. There was a guy that passed us. I kid you not. I will outline what he had with him. Here's what he had. He was wearing a baseball cap, a loose-fitting t-shirt, and a camelback. He was wearing a camelback, some athletic kind of shorts, and flip-flops. And that's literally all he had. I could not discern that he had any food. I couldn't tell if he had any pockets on these shorts,
he had a
but
power bar stuffed into the
he
camelback.
probably had something going on, like, yeah, trail mix or one thing that it was going to sustain him for this whole journey. And he's flying by us. And I'm just looking at this guy like, who is this Jamocha Shake that is just going by in flip-flops? What is happening here? And but again, in that moment, I'm seeing this and I'm observing this guy flying by us while just trying to keep it all together
It,
and
yeah,
not
it's
just,
somewhat disconcerting when that happens, right? Like you're struggling and they're just flying by.
oh my
There's a
gosh.
story that Jerry Roach tells in his 13ers book about Dallas Peak.
Oh
And
man.
he tells a story about a friend of his. Dallas Peak's a technical
Yes.
13er. The
Yeah.
easiest route's like a 5.4 or
Mm-hmm.
something.
Yep.
And a buddy of his told him a story that he was heading up, and then he gets passed by this guy wearing these red lace-up leather boots, and
Oh
they
my
called him the
gosh.
the Dutchman or something like that. And they don't the Red Dutchman, and they don't even know where he went, and they don't even know how he got down. And that's like your Dutchman experience, like this dude wearing a pair of Crocs just zips you on the
Oh,
ledges.
oh my
So
gosh.
so this goes on for a while. You're kind of dark night of the soul here on
Yes.
the
Oh yeah.
ledges.
Yep.
How do you make it through? Or how do
So
you when you get to the other side, what does it look like, Eric?
so so yeah, eventually we you get to the end of the ledges and the start of the fourth section, which is the trough. And so at that point, I feel like the exposure lightened a bit at the
Mm,
bottom of the trough. So at that point, if you're so inclined, you can look back from where you came and say, "Oh wow, I made it through all that. Holy cow!" And there's a little more terra firma, I think, at the bottom of the trough. But the trough is has its own challenges, right? You have to gain, I think, 600 feet of elevation. It's class two. You don't have to put your hands down a whole lot. But again, I'm from
everything's
living
new to you
at,
right now, right?
yeah, exactly. And so there's rock fall everywhere. You can't really avoid it. It's just a wide gully just filled with rocks. And so people are kicking rocks down on you. You're kicking rocks down on other people. Most people don't have helmets. We didn't have helmets. It just requires being careful. But I think in the trough, it's a whole different set of challenges. I feel like the exposure was a lot less, but I felt like it was kind of like two steps forward, one step back kind of a thing where
Hmm.
you hike up for a while, maybe you put your hands down occasionally, but you probably gain, or at least that what we did, we gained, 15, 20 feet of elevation, and we just had to stop because it was enough effort for us
Yeah.
that we just didn't have it in us to go for long stretches. So it was a slog. It took forever to get up the trough.
So one thing that people encounter when they're doing their first 14er, and that I'm sure you may or may not be feeling at this point is that this is your first time really hitting the wall of altitude,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
What was that like for you? What were your physiological symptoms and what was your psychological state like? What were you feeling?
Yeah, it's good questions. I feel like I drank enough water and I was probably acclimated just enough to the altitude where I didn't get sick. So,
Okay.
and I was very careful to make sure I was drinking water. I went in with a full Camelback, and whenever I stopped and took a break, made sure to take a sip. So that part was okay. The psychological part was like, what the heck is left? Like, just been scared out of my wits by this exposure. Now I'm huffing and puffing
I'm
super
six
slowly
miles
up.
into this thing. What else awaits?
Yeah, there was, yeah, a lot of grunt, a lot of physical exertion, a lot of mental, like, what else do we have to accomplish here? I've already accomplished some, but, you know, would I have done this without Travis? Not a chance. Like,
Yeah.
I would have turned back from the keyhole and not even given it a second thought. So there's a lot of emotions going through that I'm kind of wrestling through, and little did I know there was a lot more to come. So, yeah, a lot of challenges on the trough and then beyond even too.
Well, then let's move beyond. So you're kind of pushing it here. Where do you go next?
So at the top of the trough, and I think this is worth parking at for a minute too, because I've read a lot of trip reports and a lot of forums and a lot of opinions about what's at the top of the trough. So I'm going to break out my 14ers book from Dr. Jerry Roach because he describes it as a chalkstone, and I've heard the word chalkstone describe this before. He says at 13,850, which is at the top of the trough, you
Hmm.
pass a chalkstone. This may be the route's hardest move. You can climb around either side of the chalkstone. Either side is class 3. So I don't recall the chalkstone whatsoever. I have no memory at all about this thing. So I had to go back and watch people's videos. So it's basically this giant rock that's just kind of perched at the top of the trough, and you have to either go left or right around it. And in the video that I saw, if you go up to the left, there's a few more handholds. If you go up to the right, it's more of like a angled slab that doesn't
Mm,
have as many holds. Again, either one is an option. I think that the gain that you get by going up to the top of this chalkstone is 10, 12, 15 feet. So
okay.
I think that's why it's class 3 because you are scrambling to some extent.
Hmm.
It's not sustained, but it's enough to where if you fell, you would really get hurt because you get to the top of this thing and if you fell, you're probably going to break an arm or something. So
Yeah.
I think that's why they rate it class 3. I've seen other people and we met some guys on the way down that felt like that chalkstone was actually class 4. That's probably overblowing it a little bit in my opinion, even going into it with no 14er experience and thinking I thought everything was probably way more dramatic than it really was in real life. But that chalkstone is probably class 3. I think that's
Okay.
probably about right. So you get to the top of that, and then it's just a couple more steps, and then you enter the fifth section, which is called the Narrows. So similarly to the top of the trough, I don't remember very much of the Narrows, and it's not because there's
Yeah,
nothing going.
at this point, you're having a trauma response, right? Like
Oh,
you're just
that's
you're conveniently forgetting lots of details at this point. Your brain's like, no, no, we're not doing this anymore. I can only manage so much of this.
and it's I'm probably better off having had that response than actually remembering all that stuff because I don't want to go through hypnosis and figure out what is down in there. But you don't really gain much elevation in the Narrows either. It's pretty lateral, maybe gain a little
Mhm.
bit. And it's not a very long section, as I recall. The problem with the Narrows was a couple problems. Number one, if the exposure on the ledges was noticeable, the exposure on the Narrows is harrowing. It's terrifying. They say don't look down. You look to your left and you got the mountain. You look to your right and all you have is air. And so that's another life-changing experience. Probably why I don't remember it, but I do have some vague images of hanging on to an obstacle or two and kind of I feel like I was kind of swinging around it in
Yeah,
order to get past it.
yeah.
And that I don't know of all the things that I could remember, that's one of the things I remember and that's probably the one thing I wish I would have forgotten because it was just such a frightening experience. Bill Middlebrook describes it. If you look at the Keyhole Route description that he posted, he has a picture on the Narrows, and it's not a very wide ledge. It's wide enough for one person comfortably for the most part. If you
Okay.
got someone coming by you, it's there's a few sections where you're going to have to kind of maneuver around each other, but it's not really wide. Middlebrook shows a picture of what he calls badly positioned rocks, and it's because you either have to go up and over it or around it. Jerry Roach describes it as at one point you have a choice of either wiggling between a block and the wall above or stepping neatly around the exposed outside of the block.
Neatly.
I can tell you, I was doing nothing neatly in that moment. I was knee knocking, stumbly, dumbly, and just thankful to get through that. So, yeah, narrows, very exposed, a few rough spots. Those, I don't know if those spots would be class 3 because of the exposure or what they would be considered. I think on a normal trail, they'd probably just be class 2. You just kind of climb over them. But
Yeah.
I think the exposure really adds an element to that. So, yeah, eventually you kind of work your way through to the end of the narrows. And then you get to the sixth and final section, which is called the home stretch.
At any point in this, are you thinking, man, I got to go back through this? Or I know you're probably not remembering it very well, but oftentimes when I do something hard, even now, 30 years into hiking peaks, there's that recognition of, yeah, I do that again.
hmm
Is
I
that
know
striking you at all?
once we got to the summit, that hit me like a brick wall.
Yeah,
I
okay.
I don't think it hit me just yet on the narrows. Yeah, I don't know that at any time I was cognizant enough to realize, hey, we're not even halfway there yet. We've got a whole lot more work to do, even once we get to the summit.
Okay.
So yeah, you get to the home stretch, final section. You have to gain about 300 feet of elevation, and then at the very end of that, you're at the top. I remember occasional images of it, which I'll get to in a second, of the home stretch. But when I look back at pictures, I think it's important if anyone has interest in doing longs, you can see pictures of the home stretch and you might think, how in the world do you climb that without ropes? Like the pictures are just from an angle where it looks like it is sheer,
Hmm.
uphill, and impossible. I would caution folks, watch some videos of the home stretch as well, because especially in the beginning, if you look at videos, you'll see people basically just kind of aggressively hiking upwards. It's kind of similar to the
Okay.
trough. It's kind of class 2-ish in the beginning. You're hiking upwards, kind of loosely looking for your route, but you're really doing just aggressive hiking in the beginning.
Okay.
I feel like by the end of the home stretch is when it gets a bit tougher. Jerry Roach calls that kind of 3 minus.
I
I
love all the granularity we're adding to the
oh
classification system here.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe I started out on the wrong foot. I know I've been critical of the YDS in the past, and maybe this is why. There's nuances that you can throw into whether something's a 2 plus or a 4 or whatever. But the main thing I remember from the home stretch is I have this image at the end, like my belly laying on the mountain, like it's angled enough to where I'm like resting
Mm,
on the home stretch, and I have my hands are up on handholds and my feet are planted somehow. And by this time, actually long before this time, I was just physically spent. I had nothing left. My energy was gone. Obviously, mentally, I'm somewhere in a far, far away land.
mm.
And I know that summit is right up there. So I'm just doing these last gasp movements to try and get up there. I distinctly remember almost like lunging upward to reach for the next handhold and then get my next hand
Okay.
as a point of contact and then somehow find somewhere for my feet to go and then just resting there for like 2 or 3 minutes and then just doing it again and doing that a few times near the end of the home stretch. That's what it felt like. And then eventually you top out, you get to the summit
It
and
seems kind of anticlimactic at this point.
oh my gosh, it was like everything was swirling around in me. I not only had to sit on a rock and just rest for a while, I probably got a little emotional, to be honest, because I had just gone through all of this physical endurance to get up here and the mental, like, there were a few points I could have actually died on there
Yeah.
if I wasn't super mega careful. But there was relief.
Yeah,
And
I've seen people when they summit their first 14er, they cry
Mm-hmm.
or they have this surge of joy or this kind of rush of ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
This is a may sound like a weird question, but where are your tears coming from in that moment? Is it more from relief as opposed to joy, or are you feeling joy? Is there like a yay, or what's going on in your head? Because I think it's so important. So many people, I think, expect to have these peak experiences, for lack of a better term, on top of a mountain where it's like all good and you kind of greet the beauty of it all. But for a lot of people, it's like, that sucked.
Mm.
Like, where are you at on that continuum at this particular moment?
I'm pretty sure there was no joy, or
Okay.
at least very little joy. If we had done a class two in the Sawatch as my first 14er, it probably would have drifted closer to joy. This
Mm-hmm.
was more just relief, frankly, gratitude
Yeah.
for surviving this and getting to the top. It may sound like I'm over dramatizing this, but
No,
this is literally what was going through my head. I This was a crazy experience for me. So
no, you're being real.
yeah. So yeah, there was very little joy. I honestly, Travis took a picture of me and I'm kind of I'm facing southward towards the final home stretch, but I'm turning back and looking at him and he takes a picture and you could tell I was not happy to be there. And honestly, maybe this is a good time to kind of take a quick second and say I've had to go back and apologize to Travis because he even mentioned in his text to me this week, he's like, I remember you being very quiet. And I was like, oh, I know I was very, very quiet. I was not happy that we were
That's
doing
what
this.
they call brooding.
I was, my 16-year-old self was coming out there, but I was not happy. And I had to go back and apologize, say, listen, Travis, I'm sorry that I was not, more cordial, having you, led me up to this massive adventure and this life-changing moment. It was life-changing for, not so good reasons and for good reasons.
Yeah,
And
right?
I have him to thank for that. His courage is what brought me to the top of that mountain, a mountain I frankly didn't belong. And so in this picture, I'm clearly not happy. So
Yeah.
in that moment, there's no joy. And what is kind of ironic is once you get to the summit of Longs, the summit is it's massive. And so you can fit a ton of people behind me. There were beach balls getting thrown around. Someone brought a football. They were throwing passes up there. Someone had a boom box. There was music playing. Like
Oh, wow. That is
I was,
so discordant with the hiking experience of it, right? Like the
oh my
hiking
gosh.
experience is hard, and then
Hmm.
everybody up there is just having a party.
Exactly. And I had no desire to have streamers and confetti at the time, but that's okay. I kind of blocked it out and, honestly, it is a really, really hard hike. If you feel like you want to live it up, you probably deserve it because
Yeah.
it's not easy to get up there. So, but it was just, I had to block it out with everything else that was kind of swirling in my head. And to your earlier point, Zach, we still had to get down. So,
Yeah. I mean, rule number one, when you're on the summit, you're only halfway.
exactly. And that was a hard lesson. I feel like I invented the butt scoot. I know people have been butt scooting down steep mountains for forever. Man, getting down that home stretch, starting our descent, I just butt scooted the entire way.
You just
I
wanted to
was
stay low to the ground and be safe, right?
exactly, I was just emotionally fried and I had no desire to take any risks at all. So I butt scooted down the home stretch. I don't remember going back over the Narrows at all. I remember zero about it. I remember nothing going back over that Chalkstone again. I remember zero going down the trough. The one thing I do remember going back to the ledges, once we got back there, I remember feeling very comfortable going back on the ledges,
Really, you kind of
which,
broke yourself in at that point, right?
yeah, exactly. So it was really weird how all of the other more difficult things led to me being way more comfortable with the thing that absolutely changed my life, 5 hours earlier or whatever. So I remember flying back. I didn't have flip-flops on, but I was going real fast, good pace. Travis and I were going, and we get back to the boulder field, and we ran into a couple of guys that were super awesome to be with for a couple of reasons. Number one, they started talking to us about their impressions of the route, and they described, they felt that the home stretch was class three, maybe three plus. They felt the Chalkstone was class four. So it was fun to kind of start bantering with other folks that went through what you just went through.
Yep.
But the other thing that happened is going back in the boulder field, I ran out of water.
Uh-oh.
So I was a little freaking out, but these guys were awesome. They had a filter. They filtered some water for me, super kind. And so they stopped and gave me a hand there. We also found on the boulder field, we met a guy that fell somewhere along the route and broke his arm.
Hot
So,
dog.
so some folks had called the ranger station for Rocky Mountain, and they had a ranger going up the initial approach. But obviously, like we talked about, that's a long approach. It was
Yeah.
going to take a while. So Travis and I stopped, and Travis gave me this iconic line that's stuck with me the whole time. He said, yeah, most people will carry a first aid kit that will help themselves and maybe one other person. He said, I carry a first aid kit that will save a Boy Scout troop. And he did. He busted out his first aid kit. He made a makeshift splint for this guy for his arm, and we walked really slowly with him down to about the end of the boulder field is when the ranger got up there. And so the ranger caught up, talked with the guy, hung out with him for a bit. We went down the final approach. It was a long slog to get back there. At this time, once again, it's pitch black on
Oh
this
wow. So you
this
you've put in a full summer day out
oh,
there.
yeah, finally we get back to our car. It had to have been 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Oh
And
crap.
yeah, we had had a day and we threw our stuff in the back of my car, my Jeep Wrangler. I look over at Travis. He looks over at me and he says, well, there you have it. And I said,
Yeah,
yes,
there it
indeed.
was. Check
Not
it
sure there
out.
was much more to say, but
Oh
that was our
wow.
journey. So that was Long's Peak for us.
Wow. So take me to a couple days afterwards. Clearly, it didn't dissuade you from hiking. You've continued to do so. Were you thankful that you had done it? Were you resentful? Did it somehow, in some odd way, inspire you to do more? Like, I know humans are really complicated creatures, and things that are oddly traumatic can work out such that we revere them in hindsight. Like, what's your hindsight perspective on all this stuff?
That's a great question, Zach, because I don't recall exactly a couple days later. Generally, it takes me a while to process through
Yeah,
big events, and something like that probably took me even longer to process through. I didn't hike ever again that summer, and it wasn't until probably the following September that I hiked my second 14er, which was Princeton with Travis again. And
yeah.
so he had to kind of talk me off the ledge, so to speak, and say, no, this Princeton, I know Princeton is going to be way easier than Long's was. And I'm like, you sure about that? I've heard that line before. So,
Yeah,
yeah, but soon after, that's a good question. I don't know whether I was glad I had done it. I certainly could not have foreseen that I would have picked up being in the mountains as much as I have and enjoyed it as much as I have. I don't know that I was necessarily resentful. That's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what I felt just a couple days after that.
where are you at 14 years later? How do you look upon that experience now with two kids later and, 50 some odd more peaks in your pocket? Like, how do you feel about it now?
I feel like that was one heck of a way to start hiking in the Colorado Mountains.
Yeah,
I'm glad that we did it. I'm very glad that Travis had the patience with me to kind of pull me along. And I'm sure he repeatedly said, no, we got this. No, we can do this. It's not, might not be easy, but we can do this. I would say, looking back, for anyone that truly wants to hike longs, I would heartily recommend doing something else. Okay, Sherman or Quandary, kind of work your way up to it. I'm grateful that we did it. I probably would have chosen a different way to get into 14ers.
yeah,
But to be honest, if I would have done it that way, there's a chance I would have never made my way up to longs as a class three. I
true.
feel pretty well established that, 2+ is my general limit. I'm open to, we've talked about Chicago Basin and
Hmm.
maybe looking at Eolas and North Eolas. Those are class three. I'm open to that. If I hadn't started with longs, it's possible that I wouldn't even consider a class three. I may have just said, I'm going to top out at 2+ and I'm never looking at a class three ever. So I am thankful for that experience from that perspective.
It seems to me like, not to totally overplay the kind of hero's journey part of this, but for so many people, hiking peaks is a transformative experience. And
Mm,
especially a first peak can be kind of that initiatory moment. And that doesn't always have to be happy. That can be, it can be dysphoric too. It can be like
mm,
you can suffer a little bit. And it seems like your suffering led you to greater things here, but
mm,
there's a sense in which, yeah, I don't know. It's always fun to think about those. Like, would I undo the suffering in hindsight? Well, maybe not because it led me here.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that for a lot of other people, their first 14er moment was one of deep ecstasy.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my gosh, I finally got to the top. I've been working towards this and
Hmm.
training. And yours was like, I hadn't trained at all. I didn't know what a 14er was. I got, I didn't even know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I got the crap scared out of me. And there I found myself at the top of a mountain while dudes threw a football. And that's so absurdist. But yeah, that sounds like a very different first 14er experience than what I think a lot of the people that are trying to do it now. Yours was not an Instagram worthy moment.
No.
It was more like I just want to get off this thing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. What other wisdom do you have to share from the full thing?
I think my focus would be probably not to do what I did and not try to engage in that level of suffering. It would probably be more, maybe be a little smarter. And in my personal case, like, be ready for it. Like, I
Hmm.
walked in kind of blindly, just, trusting my friend, and he's absolutely worthy of that trust. But there's a sense of, also need to be prepared. Like, I need to know what I'm getting into. I need to know, okay, well, there's going to be some sections where I have to actually scramble a bit. There's going to be some sections that are a bit exposed. I haven't done much of either of those, so I needed to be ready for all of that, and I wasn't. So, if we want to take a step back and say, okay, if anyone that's interested in doing their first 14er, there is certainly value in reading Roach's book, going on the .com, getting other folks' perspective, and being as prepared as you can before it. I guess whether it's a class one or a class three, if you haven't done it, you haven't done it. And to your earlier point, you don't know what you don't know. So being as ready as you can be will just make the experience that much more enjoyable, I think. And to your point, might lead to more of like an ecstatic moment once you actually get to the end.
So, speaking of difficulty, we oftentimes talk about that here. This may be totally skewed by the fact that you had never done anything before,
It
but
it will be, absolutely.
so what would you rate the difficulty of Long's Peak? Is it closer to Mount Everest than it is to walk through the park or what?
Yeah, I think I'll quote Spinal Tap and say, yeah, this one goes to 11. On a
Yeah.
scale of 1 to 10, this is like a 306. No,
No,
it
you
was
don't understand. Most amps they go to 10, but these ones they go to 11.
this one goes to 11.
But when you need that push over the cliff, uh,
Oh, Nigel Tufnell.
yeah.
Yeah, I think even for most, even experienced hikers, whether or not the difficulty is high, the grunt is going to be high. You're gaining a ton of altitude. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of sweat. It's a lot of effortculty, as Dr. Jerry would put it. Even if you don't think the difficulty is high, even if you're not as affected by exposure, you're going to put in a lot of work if you go up longs through the Keyhole Route.
Man, you're making this sound good. Um,
Well, and there's a reason we've talked to Justin Simone. That's his favorite 14er.
yeah.
I think your dad, we talked to him. I think that's his
Yep.
favorite 14er, he said.
Yep.
There's a reason people really like Long's Peak. There's a level of challenge there that you're not going to find on Grays and Torreys. Grays and Torreys, the biggest challenge is weaving around all the people that are there. And
Yeah.
if you go on a weekend in the summer on Long's Peak, you're going to be weaving around a lot of people there too. But a good chunk of them are probably going to turn back once the going really gets tough. So I think that's part of why people really enjoy Longs is because there is a level of challenge there.
Yeah. What about the views?
I don't remember the views at all.
Yeah.
I remember zero about what I was looking at. I was just kind of in my own little hamster world at that point. So I don't remember what the view. I'm sure they're beautiful because Longs is pretty, as 14ers go, it's pretty isolated. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
only 14er north of I-70. And so it's far away from any other point that's anywhere close to being that altitude. So I'm sure the views are amazing, but I just don't remember any of them.
I love it. All right, Eric. If this first 14er experience had a song, what song would it be?
So in the moment, I'm on the ledges or we're going through the narrows. I'm not thinking of a song. These days, if I hike a 13 or 14, I'm at certain points, I'm actively thinking, oh, if this was a song, or maybe there's a song in my head because
Yeah.
there's always a song in my head. I don't remember what songs were in my head at this point when I'm on the mountain. It took me years and years of reflection to finally actually get to a song that kind of I felt like represented this. I'm sure some of our listeners that have, especially ones that have done Long's Peak, they're probably thinking, Eric, you are overblowing this big time. It really wasn't that hard. It really wasn't that crazy.
And
And
if you
if
did it now, it may not be,
it may not be,
you
it's
know?
it's
And
true.
that's the thing. That's why this is a first 14er episode, not a 38th 14er episode.
That's right. But if anyone thinks my description of the route is overblown, the song I'm going to pick is exponentially more overblown. It's this super anthemic, like fist pumping, over the top, absurd song. So it's by a band called 30 Seconds to Mars. They're an alternative band. They're headed up by Jared Leto. He's an actor and also a singer in this band. So I think it was like 2009, 2010. They released an album called This Is War. And they actually had a single off of it called Kings and Queens, which I've fallen in love with. It's a great song, also really anthemic, and it's been in a few movies. But the song I'm going to go with is called Vox Populi. The reason is because it's over dramatic. It's trying to be like, we're going to fill a stadium and everyone's going to pump their fist and everyone's going to be
Yes.
excited. Overblown like that. So the chorus says, "This is a call to arms. Gather soldiers. Time to go to war. This is a battle song, brothers and sisters. Time to go to war." And when I hear that song, I immediately put myself back on the ledges where my fears first started and just were like engulfing me. I just felt like I was almost getting compressed by all of this stress and turmoil. And am I actually going to do this? And,
Yeah.
even looking back, like I've had all sorts of failures and lots of self-doubt and lots of questions about, do I have this? Am I really capable of doing any of this? Even if just for one day, that song kind of summarizes the fact that the answer was yes. In that moment, I was going to win that war. I was going to win the war against that peak. I was going to win the war against everything that was swirling inside of me, all of the questions, all of the fear. For even just that one moment, I was going to win that war. And there's absolutely no way in the world I would have been able to do that without Travis. So I know I've said some stuff that isn't the most encouraging, but truly, Travis, I love you. I owe you one big time. And so,
But
yeah,
don't
I
you
think
ever
that.
do that to me again.
Oh, we have a running joke now. So we've hiked enough 14ers where it started with longs that on the way down, we kind of get jokey complaint mode. Like,
Yeah.
oh, we're so sore. We're so tired. So in Chicago, they're like city council members, I think. They're called aldermen.
Yep.
I've never heard this term in any other city, but Chicago's got them. And now we always joke, and he reminded me of this in his text this week. He's like, yeah, I filed a complaint with the aldermen because for whatever reason, they still haven't put an escalator down Long's Peak,
Right.
or, no one's put a moving walkway in. So I'm going to write to my alderman and complain. So, yeah, that was kind of the slight bit of levity that accompanied us down the rest of the way.
I mean, I have similar. I don't know if we'll ever do an episode on my first 14er because I did it when I was 10.
I hope we do. I'm
Uh,
curious about this.
may need to bring my dad back on for that, but
There you go.
I have similar conflicted feelings about it, right? Because like my dad is my Travis. He's the one
Yeah.
that kind of dragged me up the darn thing. Um, And, you have that feeling of why'd you do this? But at the same time, it's like deep appreciation, like, thank you for doing this
Hmm.
too.
That's right.
I oftentimes try to remember that as a dad, that sometimes the experiences that are most worthwhile aren't the ones that are appreciated in the moment.
Mm, that's a great call.
Um, so last item here, food. Um, did you eat anything at all on this journey, or were you just living off pure adrenaline? And did you eat anything near Long's Peak?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this was the start of my trail mix obsession on mountains. I don't recall what I brought with me. I'm sure it was trail mix, and that was probably about it. I know that on the way home, I think we stopped in Longmont. This is whatever, midnight-ish. And so the only thing open was Taco Bell. So that's where we ate. Honestly, if I had to do it over again, like if you go in the summertime, you can go up around Trail Ridge Road, which kind of makes a horseshoe in Rocky Mountain National Park. You can go to the top of that horseshoe and go to the visitor center. I'm pretty sure they have a restaurant up there. Or even just go all the way around and go to the west side of the park to a town called Grand Lake, which has this cool little downtown area. And
Mm-hmm.
well after my Longs Peak experience, my family went to Grand Lake. I think we've been there a couple times and just gotten ice cream. I think we've gone to a place called Sierra Sweet Shop that has lots of like fudge and ice cream. So
Oh,
if nothing else, sugar up, use that to get home, and then you can sugar crash and you can energy crash and sleep for 12 hours and then wake up the next morning and wonder what happened. But
and
so
then you're
that's,
in Denver,
and
and
then
you
you
can
can eat
eat
anywhere.
whatever you want. This may be my one opportunity to throw shade at Denver. Whatever you do, don't eat green chili in Denver because
Oh, no.
it's inferior
Well, it is
to.
inferior to New Mexico, that's for
Oh,
sure.
whoa, okay. Yeah, well, there was that controversy argument for a little while that Coloradans were saying their green chili was as good as New Mexicans, and Jared
I,
Polis was arguing with the governor of New Mexico, and I mean, frankly, that's just farcical. And
that's, you got Hatch down there. What else do you have to say?
they literally named a. It's not even a variant of green. It's just green chili. It's a Big
Yeah,
Jim green chili, but they literally named it after the place it's grown. It's
yeah,
Hatch green
exactly.
chili.
Yeah.
Well, that is exciting, Eric. Lots of sweets, fudge, sugar crash. I'm
Yum.
not
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to make of your tale here. As I come away from this, it does sound a lot to me like that journey that you don't know where you're going and where you're going to end up at the end of it,
Yeah.
but you're going to come away changed.
Mm,
And I don't think you even really knew what you were getting yourself into when you did
mm,
that.
not at all.
But such is the way of change, right?
Yeah, indeed.
So, Eric, if our listeners want to find us, come at me with their poor green chili takes, etc. Greens and Blues Podcast at gmail.com.
Ah, I like it.
I mean, this goes without saying, Eric started all this stuff. A Facebook page, Greens and Blues Podcast. You can find me at Twitter at NMHikerPerson or Blue Sky at Zach Simpson. I don't think I've checked that account in a month, but such is the way of my social media presence. And what do we have to look forward to for our next episode, Eric?
Well, Zach, I think we are going to cover another 14er, actually a combo of 14ers that you and I have each summited on separate occasions in the South Sawatch, Chavano and Tabawash.
That should be fun. I'm going to tell a story there about the one time I almost hit my personal locator beacon. So,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Oh,
And,
wow. This is going to be
and
fun.
hint, it wasn't for me.
Oh.
Well, we thank you guys so much for listening. Enjoy Eric's first 14er experience, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.